When looking to buy an access point for your home network, you're going to have a lot of different terms and jargon thrown your way, and honestly, a lot of this can distract you from what's really important. As a result, in today's episode, I'm going to be breaking down all of these different terms, and I'm going to help you identify which ones you really need to pay attention to. I'll also be providing recommendations that you can look at for access points so you can find the right one for your home network. The first thing that's on everyone's mind when they're looking to buy an access point is what speed or bandwidth it supports. When it comes to picking out an access point, you need to make sure that it supports a speed or bandwidth that is at least as fast as both your internet plan and your router. So let's say your internet plan is 500 megabits per second. In order to maximize that internet plan that you have, your router needs to support at least 500 megabits per second, and your access point is no different. An important thing to understand when it comes to the bandwidth that your access point supports is that it will go hand in hand with the Wi-Fi version that the access point supports. What I mean by this is with Wi-Fi 5, you can support Wi-Fi speeds up to and exceeding 1 gigabit per second. With Wi-Fi 6, you can support speeds up to 2 gigabits per second. And with Wi-Fi 7, you get crazy speeds. You can support internet plans that are as fast as 4 gigabits per second. In the vast majority of cases, Wi-Fi 5 will be sufficient because most people's internet plans are less than 1 gigabit per second. Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7 are overkill. We'll talk about these shortly and why you might want to get an access point that supports Wi-Fi 6 or 7. But for now, just understand from a pure bandwidth standpoint, Wi-Fi 5 for most people will be more than sufficient. Another point I want to hammer home, and I feel like I say this in all my videos, is that the more bandwidth that your access point supports doesn't mean faster connections. So if you get an access point that supports 4 gigabits per second, but your internet plan only provides 500 megabits per second, the maximum speed that your devices will be able to get in connecting to your access point is 500 megabits per second. By adding an access point that supports speeds faster than your internet plan, you're basically just paying for this extra capacity that you won't be using because your devices can only move as fast as the internet plan. So we just talked about how the bandwidth supported by an access point goes hand in hand with the Wi-Fi version it supports. So the next logical question is, what Wi-Fi version should your access point support? To get the most out of your Wi-Fi access point, you want to make sure that it supports at least the Wi-Fi version that your router supports. So the first thing you want to do if you're not sure what Wi-Fi version your router is go look up the make and model of your router, see what Wi-Fi version it is, likely Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 6, or Wi-Fi 7, and that will be your starting point for your access point. So for example, if your router supports Wi-Fi 5, you want to make sure that your access point supports at least Wi-Fi 5. Now there are some cases where you might even want to get an access point that's a higher version than your router, and that's important to do if you think you're going to be updating your router in the future. The last thing you want to do is if you update your router from Wi-Fi 5 to Wi-Fi 6, but your access point only supports Wi-Fi 5, you don't want to have to upgrade that access point as well in order to take advantage of all the features of Wi-Fi 6. The basic rule of thumb here is the higher the Wi-Fi standard, the more Wi-Fi features it will provide. So if you want to take advantage of those advanced features, you need to make sure that, number one, your access point supports those higher Wi-Fi standards, but also your router needs to as well. Because if your router doesn't support those advanced features, your access point won't be able to provide those advanced features to your devices. With that said, if you have a Wi-Fi 5 router and it meets all of your needs currently and you don't see your internet needs changing in the future, there's no point in getting a Wi-Fi 6 or 7 access point. You can just get a Wi-Fi 5 access point because you know your internet needs and your infrastructure won't be changing anytime soon. Another thing when looking at access points that you'll see a term PoE or Power over Ethernet. Honestly, every single access point I've looked at offers this functionality. So when it comes to access points, you can power them either with a power adapter and plug this device directly into an outlet, or you can power it through an Ethernet cable, which allows you to implement this device in a location that's far away from a power outlet. All access points at this point have the option of PoE. You'll just need to make note of what PoE version the device requires. I've seen with Wi-Fi 5 access points, most of them need the standard PoE in order to power the device. With Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7 access points, a lot of them need PoE Plus to power the device. And this basically just means you need to get a different PoE injector or PoE switch in order to power the device. I've made a few other videos going into PoE and how it works and what the different versions are. I'll include those in the description if you want to learn more about this. But at this point, when picking out an access point, they all support PoE, so you can just move on. You don't have to pay too much attention to it. Another term you'll frequently see when looking at access points is the term MU-MIMO. This stands for multi-user, multiple input, multiple output. And before you get overwhelmed by this jargon, just know that it actually means something really simple. What MU-MIMO means is that it basically means your access point has the functionality to serve multiple devices at the same time. Multiple inputs and multiple outputs can be happening at the same time. It basically just says your access point can efficiently handle communications from multiple different devices. Multi-user MIMO is a topic for another video where I'll go into detail about that. But basically the different Wi-Fi standards that the access point supports refers to different multi-user MIMO technology. So basically, as you increase the Wi-Fi standard from Wi-Fi 5 to Wi-Fi 6 to Wi-Fi 7, the multi-user MIMO technology just gets better and more efficient. An important takeaway about MIMO is the fact that it doesn't increase your individual device's internet speed. It allows you to serve multiple devices at the same time, and it allows them to function at their maximum internet speed, but it doesn't increase the speed of your internet connection that you have from your internet plan. Honestly, you won't notice the impact of MIMO unless you have many devices performing bandwidth-heavy tasks all at the same time. Chances are in most home networks, you might have one or two devices performing bandwidth-intensive tasks at the same time, but your access point, even if it's Wi-Fi 5, can handle it with the MIMO technology that it has. The next term you'll see when looking at access points, and honestly it's quite deceiving, is how many connections the device can support. So I've seen with some access points, it will say it can support 200 connections at the same time. What this means is that there are 200 devices or clients that can be connected to your access point at a given point in time, but it doesn't mean you can have 200 active internet users all performing activity through the access point at the same time. What this is assuming is when you have 200 devices that are connected to your access point, chances are there's only going to be a few that are active at a given point in time. So don't get confused by this statement. Basically, it just means you can have a lot of devices that are connected to the Wi-Fi network of your access point. In short, all access points can support a lot of devices connected to its Wi-Fi network. This isn't really a differentiator or anything you need to pay attention to, because the lowest number I've seen when looking at access points is 200 devices at once, and nobody has 200 devices in their home network, so it's not really anything that's a concern at this point. The last thing you need to think about when it comes to picking out an access point is what brand to get. The two most well-regarded brands in this space for access points are TP-Link Omada and Ubiquiti. I can provide some examples in the description, but if you go with either of those brands, you probably won't have any problems. It's also important to note that you can get a different brand access point than your router is. So for example, if you have a Netgear router and a TP-Link Omada or Ubiquiti access point, you're not going to have any problems. You can mix and match the brands without having to worry about compatibility. So at the end of the day, what are the things you need to pay attention to when buying an access point for your home network? Well, first and foremost, the version is very important because you want to make sure that it's at least the version that your router supports. And also the bandwidth that the access point supports will go hand in hand with that Wi-Fi version. The other important thing to think about is the brand of device you get. Whether it be TP-Link Omada or Ubiquiti UniFi, chances are you won't have any issues with either of those brands or any of their devices. So those are the two most important things. When it comes to how these devices are powered, the number of concurrent devices that can connect to these devices, or the version of multi-user MIMO that it uses, you don't have to pay as much attention to these. These are less important. Namely because multi-user MIMO, that will go hand in hand with your Wi-Fi standard that the access point supports. The number of concurrent devices that can connect to the access point, it's going to be more than enough for your home network. And how the devices are powered, they can all be powered by PoE or with a power adapter, so you don't really have to pay attention to that either. I'd love to see in the comments section what brand and model you end up going with. And as always, thanks for checking out this episode from Network from Home, and we'll catch you on the next one.